The other thing, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of, it's called the viscosity rule. It has to do with paints, and that's what I want to talk about next.
How much you gotta tin it up?
Right. Now, viscosity rule, what that means is you bring your paints to the viscosity of 2% milk. Now, if you don't know what 2% milk viscosity is, just stop on the way home today, buy a little quart, and that is what you want to mix your paint to. If you mix your paint to viscosity of 2% milk, and it doesn't matter what the manufacturer says, they all recommend 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1. The problem with that is when they put their paints in the jars, and let's say you have a bottle of red paint and a bottle of brown paint from the same manufacturer, but the viscosity to start with is different because the red's thicker than the brown, let's say. And you mix it 3 to 1, what they said, you're going to have 2 different kinds of viscosity to spray through your airbrush. You're going to have 2 different results. One might clog, one might not. So the viscosity rule, if you thin your paint to 2% milk, it'll spray through your airbrush and it probably won't give you any trouble. And that's what I've done. I've learned to do that years ago, and I've never had a problem. Whether you spray oil-based paints, acrylic paints, thick paints, thin paints, even paints that say ready to use right out of the bottle, check them. Because even though they say they're ready to use, it might not necessarily be ready to use depending on the PSI you're spraying at. I mean, if you pump up your pressure 20, 25, 30 PSI, you could get this thick cream coat to go through it, you know? So, 2% rule, viscosity rule, I've lived by it, I learned it, and I tell you it works. And it's a lot less aggravating. You got a question?
How do you determine that?
Take a little bottle of 2% milk, set it right next to your paint bottle, and go, yep.
So it's basically trial and error.
Yes, practice, practice, practice. You know, I didn't get it right away. It's not something you're going to learn overnight.
As long as you get close, you're probably
Exactly.
not too bad.
It's not rocket science. You know, if it's the 1% milk, it'll probably... Okay, welcome back.
Okay.
Go ahead, John.
You know, for your general layman, what's the difference between 1% and 2%? I mean,
if you thin your paint too much,
Yeah.
you're going to lose your surface tension and the paint's going to run. when you're
well,
spraying it through
how
the
do you know that? I mean, you know, to me,
Practice.
you look at a jar, 1% and 2%, it's the same.
Yeah. I mean, if you... It's more comes down to practice, John. I mean, get both. There is a difference.
Yeah.
You know, I'm using 2% milk as an example because it's a good it's a good way to start. It gives you something to
Trial
start
and error.
with. Yeah. You know, at first I was scared to mix paint. I was like, well, I don't know what 2% is. I'm not really sure. But now I can take a bottle of paint and just by like this is pretty thick, and when you get into your flat clear coat stuff is extremely thick. So you're going to have to thin this a lot more than you would a regular bottle of paint. You know, this stuff is pretty thick. But after you practice and you've mixed paints, you'll see. It even bubbles like 2% milk when you look at it. It's just, it's weird. But you believe it or not, you're going to be like, this is right, and you'll know. And it's all about practice and just...
Can you take a sip of it? Just as
I don't know. I mean, you could.
You can if you want.
You could, but...
Let us know how it works out.
So, the viscosity rule of 2% milk, I use that as an example. I'm sure there's other things out there you could use,
Yeah.
not just milk, but I'm using that as an example. The other biggest thing, the second thing that you got to keep in mind with paint is the shaken and stirred. You want to be stirred, not shaken with paint. The first thing we do when we get a bottle of paint off the shelf, what do? We do this, right? And this is good. It really agitates the paint up, and this is shaking the paint. The problem with doing that is all the pigment on the bottom
stays there.
Right, so what happens is we have a diluted concentration at the top and a really thick pigment concentration at the bottom. So we're going to take this shaken bottle of paint and we're going to paint something with it. And we take paint out of the top, it's nice and thin, it looks great, and as you get down towards the bottom it gets really thick. So your pigmentation of the paint is going to be a different color almost, a very different thickness. So when you just shake this up, people have taken little tricks and they put ball bearings in here to help mix that paint. You can put a bolt in there, I guess, if you wanted to. I mean, there's all kinds of tricks on the market, right?
Glass isn't gonna break.
My idea, when you take a bottle of paint, is you should mix this paint the way the manufacturer does it. And the way they do it before they bottle it in here, to make sure that every single bottle of paint that you buy, if you're buying engine black or grimy black, that every single bottle's the same. And the way they do that is they thoroughly mix their pigment before they put it into the bottle, so that you don't have one bottle thicker than the other bottle, thicker than the other bottle. Very neat tools out there to mix your paint. This is what I love. John, you love these.
Oh, yeah, so do
As long as the pigment's not too thick on the bottom.
Just make sure you take your finger off it when you pull it out of the bottle.
This little tool right here is the way the manufacturer, it duplicates the way the manufacturer mixes the paint before they put it in the bottle. Now, when you use one of these, there's a couple of things to keep in mind.
Been there, done that.
Before you put it, you don't want to turn it on before, I mean, it's probably not a big deal. You could put it in, you mix your paint, and then shut it off before you take it out.
You learn that trick in a big hurry.
It's the same thing with an electric toothbrush.
And this, what you're doing is you're mixing your paint, you're not just shaking it. And that way you're going to have a consistent paint throughout the whole course of the bottle's life. So it's very important when it comes to painting acrylics or any kind of paint, you know. You buy a gallon paint that you're going to paint your house with, you want to make sure that that thing's mixed up really well, the oil floats on top. We've all seen it. So we always make sure that we mix that paint really well. It's the same thing when you try to spray through an airbrush. You want to keep all your paint extremely well mixed. So on top of that viscosity rule, I recommend, I mean, these little tools right here, I think I got this for 15, 13 bucks. They come with shorter ones, longer ones.
They work like a charm.
And they blend your paint, and they mix it really well. So whether you're brushing paint, airbrushing your paint, it's worth having in your toolbox. I never shake my paint anymore. When I get a brand new bottle of paint, I know it's been on its side, been upside down in the bag before I got it home. The first thing I do is take the cap off. I wash the cap, put it back on, and it never leaves this position. I never put my bottles of paint, even when I transfer them from the clubhouse home, they stay in this position. Because the last time that it was on its side and the paint got all on here, you can't get the cap off because it's all dried on there. So my little pet peeve that I do is I never let these bottles, after I buy them, leave this position. And I always make sure if I do any brush painting with it and I use the edge to, you know, clean the paint off before, I always clean that off. It's a good habit to get into, because I hate when you try to open these up, you know, and there's...
You're grabbing a vice grip.
See how clean that cap is? And it'll never get stuck. And this thing's half empty, you know, so it just adds stopping the frustration of trying to get balls of paint open, you know.
And at $5 a pop, you're saving yourself some money.
Right.
Air.
No dried hard paint.
When you take the paint out of the bottle and you go to mix it, you mix it in a separate
That's a good question.
mixing. Now,
That's been debated probably on all kinds of different forums out there.
You know,
Do you
how
mix
you
the
do
paint? Well, the way I do it, I'm gonna show you. You can, like on gravity feed airbrushes, some people will take and put 2 drops of paint in here,
Yeah.
3 drops of thinner, and they'll mix it right in here with a little toothpick, and they spray.
how do they know it's like 2% milk?
The practice comes in. They've been probably spraying for a long time.
Yeah.
As a beginner or as an intermediate, I'd recommend mixing outside, because once you get that paint in here and you've mixed it and you go to spray it, if it ain't right, you might as well spray cleaner through your brush and start over, and it's going to get frustrating. Do something that's going to most likely help you to succeed. Mix your paint outside of your airbrush and then add it.
Yeah, how do you do it?
I mix it outside.
Okay.
Yes. And the way I do it, I can show you. It's very simple the way I do it. I bought these little bottles at Michael's. You can get like a bunch of these. Pretty cheap. And what I'll do is, let's say I take my grimy black and I'll mix it. And you want to make sure when you mix it that you get all the product off the bottom. You can kind of feel it down there, you know. You want to make sure you blend the paint and mix it really well, make sure all the pigment is mixed. And what happens as soon as you're done mixing your paint, the pigment starts to settle almost immediately. Now if you just shake a bottle of paint, the pigment's going to settle a lot quicker than if you mix it and blend it. Although it's already starting to settle, the settling process will take a lot longer. What I'll do, John, is I'm going to take, let's say, 1 part of paint, and I'll throw that in just like that. And I'll take, most cases you're going to use water. I guess we could use water.
What was that stuff you just?
That was alcohol.
Okay.
But like I said, if you're just beginning, I don't recommend using alcohol. So there's, if I took paint to here, there's 2 parts, and if we go 1 more, 3, and then you want to make sure you blend this before you put it in your airbrush. And if you look at that, that's about 2% milk. So if you start out at like 2.5 to 3 to 1 with most of these,
Kind of foamy.
yeah, it's because I used water. Alcohol doesn't do that so bad, but the foam ain't gonna matter when you spray it through your.
So what you're saying is you mix as much as you figure you're gonna use at that particular application.
Yes.
And just leave, nothing's ever,
That's also a good point. If you're going to mix up a lot of paint, you know you're not going to use it all, use distilled water to store your paint. You can keep it mixed, but you use distilled water. If you're just going to spray a little bit and be done with it and clean it out and empty the bottle, then just use water. Yeah, but distilled water is definitely what you'd want to store it with.
did anybody ever mix in the bottle?
In here,
Yeah,
you're taking a risk of destroying the whole batch that way.
okay. I
Yeah.
wonder if some people would do that.
Probably. I mean, when I get down to, a little bit of paint left on the bottom and I want to use it all up, I'll go ahead and mix up the last batch with some distilled water.
Can you take a bottle of paint and put it in a jar and mix the whole thing?
Yeah, if you want to do a production run or something like that.
Now, what you're saying though, that what you've mixed there is basically, I use today, when I'm done, I throw it
Just
away.
do it
Yeah.
a small jar.
Okay.
Yep. And I don't use water anymore. I mean,
So you don't have.
it all depends. Like I said, when you get more advanced, you can start using alcohol, but alcohol really speeds up the drying process of an already fast drying product. So acrylic paint is just produced to dry very fast.
Give yourself a break, use water.
Right. Yes, John?
You take a brand new bottle of paint that you buy at the Hobby Emporium for 3 times as
Yep.
much as any place
Yeah,
else.
3 times more than it's worth.
Yeah.
Better edit that
But
one
you
out.
take a brand new bottle of paint, put it in a large jar. You mix it, with your thinner, and mix it all at once, and just use a portion of it, and then store it. If you use like distilled water.
You can do that. If you're gonna mix the whole entire thing of paint,
Yeah.
and you can do it to mix it to 2% or that viscosity, and you're gonna store it, do it with distilled water.
So I can bring all my paints up to your house and you can mix them for me.
Sure. For a small fee. Why not?
House one.
The fee might be a little bit.
$10 a bottle?
Now there's a lot of different paints on the market. I brought a couple of different examples, like the picture up here, this cream coat and this American stuff. These are very highly pigmented paints. They're very thick.
You have to cut that probably 2
Michael's specials.
Right. Now, paints are designed differently than other paints. Like, for example, this paint, if you try to mix this with a 70% alcohol, it turns into a clumpy mess. It doesn't mix with alcohol at all. It mixes with water. Don't ask me why. I don't know how it's made, but I've tried thinking I'm going to thin this with alcohol and spray it through my airbrush. Horrible idea. Horrible idea. And when you get into doing this and you want to use this, I'd recommend this for a more advanced airbrush techniques, let's say. Because you have to thin this with water, and now you're really messing with the surface tension and viscosity of this paint. And I've used those pipes that I painted was used with this, I painted those with this paint.
Is that right?
But it was like 7 coats.
7?
Yeah, because I had to thin it down so much to get it through this airbrush that as soon as it hit the surface, it starts to run. It starts to bleed, it just makes a mess. So it's very hard, and I wouldn't recommend using these to begin with. They're fun to play with once you get into more advanced airbrushing techniques, you know, but they're very hard to spray. A lot of the stuff we use in our hobby for model railroading is these polyscale acrylics. They're already pretty thin. They need to be thinned out more though to go through an airbrush. I usually thin these about 3 to 1. That's what I did with this engine black. And that's about 2% milk. And that'll spray through your airbrush just nicely. Acrylic paints, you thin with water.
And it'll cover all right?
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah. Ideally, you want to keep your airbrush about 5 or 6 inches away from what you're spraying. When I weather, like for example, the locomotive in this car that was base coat weathered with an airbrush, I'm usually about 6 to 8 inches away, and by the time the paint hits this model, it's already just about dry, if not dry. What happens is that paint dries before it hits the model. I could take my finger and wipe it off if I didn't clear coat this model. And that's just one of the techniques you learn, you know, that hopefully I'll do another class here maybe next month or a month from now.
That's acrylics.
Yep.
Latex paint is acrylic.
Yeah, but latex paint is very thick. I haven't had any experience spraying latex paint through an
You cut
airbrush.
latex paint down 50 to 1. I've done it.
You spray it through an airbrush?
It went through an airbrush, but not as small as one of these.
What?
It was a little larger.
Paint your house with it?
No, we were doing a mural.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm sure you can thin any kind of
Spray gun.
paint. But
At $16 a quart as opposed to $3.50 or $5 for.
you want to spray a $300 or $35 model with latex?
It's acrylics.
Yeah. I've never done it. I mean, that would be more of an advanced type airbrushing class, I think, if we want to get into different paint techniques. I'm not familiar with it.
What exactly is
Huh?
I think it was long.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the pigment sizes are so big on those.
Yeah.
You're lucky you got it through the airbrush.
Well, there's
I mean, a Wagner Power Painter's an
product.
airbrush, you could probably get it through that, but when you're
well,
talking,
that's undiluted. But there's a product out that you can cut latex paint to 50 to 1.
I've never sprayed latex through an airbrush, nor,
That is a
I don't know if I'd want to, for, you know, model railroading.
Well, you're not gonna
Worth a
get
shot.
much less than a quart of that anyhow.
Yep.
Some of the stuff.
So
we
these
use-
cream coats, American, you've seen forklift, they're very thick, very hard to work with, and if you try to spray them through an airbrush, it's going to become very frustrating if you don't know what you're doing. So not recommended. The polyscale stuff is designed for model railroading, it's designed for the hobbyist like us. Sprays very well through an airbrush if it's thin to that viscosity rule. Some of these paints come already diluted from the manufacturer. Maybe some of them are, maybe some of them aren't. It all falls down to is red thicker than brown, thicker than white, thicker than green. You just gotta look at it with your own eyes. After you mix it, if it looks like the right consistency, spray it through your airbrush.
Do paints come pre-mixed?
Yes.
They do.
Yeah, oh yeah, from the manufacturer. They're ready to spray through your airbrush. But like I just said,
Yeah,
make sure it's the right viscosity.
okay.
You know, it might be ready to spray for them, but for a beginner, you know, make sure it's the right viscosity. Like I just said, if the red might be thicker than the brown, you know.
Do they say on the container whether they consider it ready for airbrushing or not?
Well, here's a good example of that right here. Ready to use opaque airbrush colors.
Badger.
Yes, they have a very good line of paint, but make sure that it's at 2% viscosity.
Do they charge the same as,
I don't know. I don't know if it's more or not.
Yeah.
Maybe because it's ready to use. Maybe not because it's diluted. I don't know.
John.
I buy. Go
I
ahead.
was gonna say, John, you're gonna cut this like 3 or 4 to 1.
right,
So if you spend 15 on this or 15 on that,
You're gonna get a lot more paint.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well-
So ready to use 1 ounce versus get 3 bottles of this one. So I think the cost, and you practice and learn how to mix your own paint, is a lot more cost effective than buying something ready to use.
So the old expression goes, you pay somebody to do it or you do it yourself.
Correct. Yep.
And say, end up the same product.
These paints,
Do it for free.
this is more for the RC world. You see a lot of these paints for sale like Hobbytown. These go through an airbrush just nicely. They're acrylic. They're a little thicker than the poly scale and things like that. So you'd have to maybe go 4-to-1 with this. But I've sprayed this successfully when I was doing some military models, and it works really well. Those, once again, any kind of acrylics, you thin with water to begin with. When you get more comfortable with thinning with water, and you're sick of the foam that water produces, you kind of got to wait for it to settle. Start playing with some alcohol. Don't go 90%, there's no need. 70%, you mix it with the acrylics, it's going to dry extremely fast. It really, your pace has to be a lot quicker when you're dealing with alcohol. But it mixes, in my opinion, better than water using alcohol. Model Master Acrylics, another one, really good brand for what we do. I've used a lot of these different paints just to do these models here.
Question.
Sure.
Would you say for alcohol, don't use a 90%, 70?
No need to. Yeah, 90%. 70% will work just fine with your acrylics. I found 90% sometimes starts clumping. I don't know what it does or the chemistry involved, but what was that?
You're shocking it.
Yeah. I did 90% when we went up to Ed's house, and it clogged my airbrush pretty quick. 70%, no problem. So.
What about straining it?
Yeah, you know, that's another debate that could go on forever. I don't strain my paint. I've never had the need to strain the paint. You go down to Main Trains, Jerry down there, very knowledgeable about airbrushing, he strains his paint.
Does he?
Yeah, and he recommends that to anybody. I was standing there one day and he was talking to a customer and was explaining to them that he strains his paint.
Well,
That's great.
Maybe that would be because years ago they didn't
What do you strain it
micro
through?
strain it with.
A lot of people use like nylons. Just don't put it back in the drawer when you're done.
Why not?
But you know, a piece of nylon's a thin enough mesh, a very fine mesh. That's probably one of the best things. They sell little cups that have little strainers on them. I don't think it's necessary. Unless you really have a really old bottle of paint that you can't mix, just throw that bottle of paint away and go buy a new one.
Do you ever spray with petroleum-based paints?
No,
Okay,
no.
takes care of that question.
No, I've dealt with just the lacquer, you know, these these scale coat paint, and it's very frustrating. Like I said, I would save these kind of oil-based paints for more advanced techniques. If you're just starting out airbrushing, stick with acrylics. They're easy to use, they're very forgiving, they lay a nice coat of paint, and they're easy to clean. When you start getting into this stuff, and you're in a confined space, it smells really strong,
And it'll knock you on your ass.
and you got to use mineral spirits to clean it, and you need a very good ventilation system when you start playing with this stuff. You almost need a respirator, you know. When I spray acrylics, I use just a regular little dust mask, and I built a nice spray booth, you know, but I still wear one of these because that itemization of paint still gets into your system. The airbrush, the paint booth doesn't take it all. So, you know, it's not bad to have one of these on hand. They're pretty cheap, a 5-pack for a couple of bucks, just to help protect yourself. But when you start talking about these kind of solvent-based paints and things like that, and what we use to clean them, probably not one of the healthiest things to do. If you don't have the right environment to spray that kind of paint, I wouldn't recommend it starting out. You know, you really need a good setup
So
or
just
something
stick
like
with
that.
acrylics.
Yeah, for what we do, it works great. It's a fast-drying paint. It's very forgiving, like I said, and works
If you
really
make a
well.
mistake, you can wipe it off fairly quickly, easily.
You can also buy, like what's up on the screen, these paint kits that come with, you know, you can get enamels, you can get all kinds of different, you know, things out there from testers. Any other questions about paint that Paul could answer? Because he's our paint expert. I know he's going to pull me aside after this, be like, you know. All right, well. The other thing is about all these airbrush gadgets. There's a lot of them on the market, necessary or not. Some of them are. One of the biggest things that I think I could recommend would be an airbrush holder. You don't realize you need one of these until you have a loaded airbrush and you don't have anywhere to set it down. So this is a good little tool to have. And it's very nice, you can get some that have that hold 2, and then like the example on here, this one will hold 4 airbrushes. Others will just hold a couple. Very cheap, 12, 13, 14 bucks.
That's the one that has
It has the air.
Yep, that's exactly like this one
moisture
here.
trap that goes on that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Here's one right here. This comes off, so you can adjust it if you need to. But this will hold your air regulator if it fits in there, and it's adjustable. But nice little tool to have, especially when you're dealing with airbrushing. And the other thing that I had for the longest time was this little hook. This came with my first airbrush purchased, and I had this just mounted on the side of my spray booth with a bolt. And what I did was it just holds my airbrush just like that, and that was mounted for the longest time until I bought this. So you could even make your own little airbrush holder, but it comes in handy when you need to set your airbrush down for something and you don't have anywhere to put it. So recommended. And then the other things is they have all kinds of different color cups options on the market. Anything from very large glass cups for large applications. These hook right up to the bottom of your bottom feed airbrush. They're not a gravity feed tool, they're made for bottom feed airbrushes. So if you have a very large application, like you're spraying terrain, or you're spraying a building or anything like that.
How about track?
Yeah, you could use it for track.
No, but if you're upstairs here, you had to want to spray a lot of track in place, I would think you would use that.
Yep. Just remember, when you're using a big bottle like this, the pigment, after you mix your paint, starts to settle. And it settles to the bottom right where that little guy starts to pick the paint up. So something this large determines the pace you're going to work at. And that's what the big deal is with these big bottles of paint. They got these, you can hook them right up to different caps. You can hook a whole bottle of paint right up to it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, when you're dealing with more paint, you have to work at a lot faster pace because that paint starts settling. So if you want to take this off from time to time, mix it back up, stick it back on, you can do that. The other thing, another gadget that I don't have with me, but it's a little siphon filter.
Yeah.
It was on the screen there. And what that does, it slides over the hose, this little siphon hose, and it just helps to keep the pigment or any debris from getting up in there. Kind of goes along the line about filtering the paint kind of thing. Instead of filtering, some people use this.
Do you use that?
I do not.
You don't?
No, I don't. I haven't used a color bottle in a long time. For engines and rolling stock and things like that, I have just this little color cup that I use. So instead of this very large bottle, I mix my paint, and I just take that paint and I put it into the cup, and then that cup attaches to my airbrush, and that's how I spray. And if I start to run low on paint, I just take a little more, put a little more in, and keep going. That way I always have fresh product, and my product is separate, so if I'm working on something for a long period of time, I can stick this in, mix it right up, and then just get some more and keep going. So I always have a nice constant pigment of paint to spray through my airbrush.
So that would be one plus over using that bottom jar.
Yes.
Yeah.
You mix a lot of your paint?
Do I? Yes.
So you got jars of paint later?
I do not. I mix as I go. Yeah. Yeah, I mix as I go. I don't have a bunch of paint all pre-mixed. No, I don't do that. Some people can. There's nothing wrong with doing that. And then same thing with this. It's just a gravity feed version of this little bottom feed that I use. This one requires more PSI. This one doesn't. This gravity feeds right in, and I would take my paint, put a few drops right in the color cup, and spray what I need to do. Now, if that starts to dry on me, I'll get some cleaner, drop it in there, spray it through, clean the tip, and I can keep going.
Now with that, that gravity feed, you just get one constant flow of paint down through there, right?
The paint flow is determined by how far you pull this trigger back.
The amount of paint that it lets into the airstream.
Correct. And you can adjust that flow by your paint flow knob back here,
Okay.
which is actually just a stopper.
Yeah.
That stops your second action. Remember, the first action is your air,
I like
and then your
that.
paint.
Yeah.
It's a high resolution airbrush is all it is. So it falls back on those dots. Your single action airbrush sprays larger dots. These spray smaller
I
dots.
found that as you get older, you have less control over your fingers.
Right.
And all of a sudden it's all over the place.
Yeah, I slipped too before. You get in real close to something and you don't want a lot of paint.
Yeah.
If you can control that, great. But when you're really up close to something, you want to be able to turn this knob and only allow that paint product to go this far,
Yeah.
So yes, it's a nice little feature.
If you just do it by feel, over a period of time, your finger just goes wherever the nerves want it to go.
Very true, very true. So some of the other gadgets out there that are available on the market, there's, like on here we got different hoses we talked about. If you want to hook up multiple airbrushes to your compressor, there's adapters for that.
I gotta find my airbrush.
There's also quick disconnects, QDs they're called. These are kind of nice. This attaches to the bottom of your airbrush, and it's exactly what it is. It's a quick disconnect. So you can disconnect from one airbrush, attach to another. You don't have to unscrew.
Like this?
Yeah.
Because that's very fine thread on it.
Now, it's not a big deal as a beginner, but as a more advanced airbrushing and you start using your airbrush more frequently, you're going to want quick disconnects because it's kind of a pain having to unscrew and go to a different brush, And then there's all kinds of different adapters as well that attach to your airbrush. Because not all airbrushes are the same. This will need to be changed. The one on your airbrush may need to be changed. This one here is an 1/8 inch.
How does that connect to the hose? Is it crimped on there?
Yeah. Just like that. Mike.
So you can change that?
Oh, yeah.
You can't change this. What you have is a different hose. I don't know where my other hose is.
Where'd your hose go?
Yeah, the green hose. Yeah, there we go. So the hose that came with my gravity feed airbrush, see the size of the threads on that one? It's designed to go with this hose. That's why they gave me this hose, obviously, to go with this airbrush, right? So this is a 1/4 inch. This one's an
1/8 inch.
1/8.
I'm saying.
So having the quick disconnects would come in handy, depending on what airbrush you want to use. So they're not all built equally, you know what I mean? This one has a lot larger connection.
So what
I
you
can't.
need is an adapter?
Correct. That's what all these different options are. Just a little brass, adapters coming out of your airbrush, and then split it or split it up here somewhere. So at the moment, I can't connect this airbrush to my compressor because I don't have the right adapter for it. So that'll be the next thing I have to purchase so I can start using this one.
That's a new purchase, huh?
That's when you're like, yeah, and you go to use it, you're like, oh. So.
Spare parts.
Yep.
Yeah. Also, another gadget that's on the market is called needle juice. And what that is your needle, acrylic paint. Actually, I got a couple needles. I don't need to take that apart. Acrylic paint dries very fast, like we talked about, and it likes to stick to the needle. What needle juice does is it coats the needle. And it's designed to stop the paint from drying to it. And if you look at this is Badger's product. Red Gab is Badger spelled backwards. That's how they do their product. That's the actual name of the product.
That's like girls'
It's
name.
Badger spelled backwards.
Yeah. Jesus.
That's not the only product available, there's other stuff out there. But all you do with this, they recommend you coat, I think every, it depends on how much you use your airbrush. I think it's like every 60 hours.
Are you coating it like you are right there? You gently
Yes.
just take the needle out? And
Yeah, you'd want to use a nice soft cloth, like a cotton, and you're just going to coat. You don't need to coat the whole needle, because remember, your paint really only touches maybe that much of your needle.
Just make sure you stroke with the needle, not against it.
Right, you don't want to do anything to compromise the tip. So once you
Or your
coat that
hand.
with the needle juice, usually you can spray for quite a while, you
Do you
know.
use it?
I do not. Nope. I do not.
It's gone. What do you use?
I don't use anything to coat the needle.
But then this kind of a needle is different than that kind.
Well, there's still a needle in there.
Yeah, but it's very short.
Yeah.
Right.
But-
So you just have to coat the part that actually comes in contact with the paint. So that's just another product available. I haven't had any experience using it, but I have had where I've had to disassemble my airbrush because I got called away during an airbrushing project, and when I come back,
Everything's dry.
everything's dried up and the needle's coated with acrylic that's, you know, like concrete. So at that point, you want to just use some cleaner, either Windex, and if that doesn't get it off, just soak it under some really hot water and see if that'll start releasing and getting the product to flow again, and just keep it clean. You can use an extremely fine steel wool. You won't compromise the needle to clean off anything that doesn't come off. But if you're worried about, you know, the needle getting coated with any acrylic paint or anything like that, you can use needle juice. It's an option.
You get extra needles there, they come with the gun and you buy the separate.
Nope, those came with the new gravity feed, and the needles are, you can get from 0.2 millimeter, there's a 0.3 in here, and this is a 0.5. And all those do, it all depends on how much the paint you want to flow. So when you start getting down into 0.02s and things like that, that'll spray inks really well. Paint probably not so much. You get into 0.3s and 0.5s where you really start getting into acrylics. If you want to start spraying latex through your gun, you probably want a really good sized needle, just because you're going to have so much thick product flowing through there.
1.0.
Nozzles match the needle.
The nozzles match the needles
Yeah, but if you strain,
because it's where the needle seats into the nozzle.
that's where
Well,
you strain the paint.
what about, I've seen some advertisements, they say no changing needles. What are these guys doing? Are they using a needle that's in between, like your 0.3?
I don't know.
You know, because I mean, you say the fineness, they're trying to get away with
Got 3 different airbrush.
having to have 2 or 3 different needles on hand.
I haven't seen that advertisement yet. I'm not sure
You're
why.
talking about an Aztec that has the whole nozzle changed, which the needle is inside the nozzle, and in theory, you don't have to take
Well,
it
they're all
apart.
inside of a nozzle, though, from what I understand, George, but they, I mean, because these have the nozzle in the little jars there.
Yep. There's a nozzle, there's a tip in here.
I think what George is saying is the nozzle, not the needle is part of the nozzle.
Oh, okay,
It's all one component.
Yeah, these are separate.
okay.
That's your paint nozzle, and this is the tip.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah. And that just goes with your 0.2 millimeters so that this will seat properly.
Yep.
You won't have any leaks get by there. So there's different options available. I used a 0.3 millimeter, and I don't even remember exactly what this bottom feed came with, but it works great, and I have never changed it. Why fix it if it's, you know, it works. I've never had a problem spraying through this airbrush, and I'm not even sure what size is in here, because it was like 8 years ago when I bought it. I do have the instructions somewhere.
You haven't cleaned it since then?
I've taken this airbrush apart twice in the 8 years I've had it.
Really?
Speaks a lot to
Yeah.
the product, huh?
Because I don't let the paint dry inside the airbrush. If you do that, then you get pretty much take it apart.
And you just clean it with the Windex.
Yep. Yep. All your paint is from here forward. There's really not a lot of, you know, if you get any paint back here, it's because you spilled it there, or you got a bad seal somewhere, and that's just something you got to deal with a separate occasion there. But for the most part, your paint, it just, you know, there's not a lot there. It comes in contact with the needle, the nozzle, and the tip, and that's it. It goes through the nozzle, not around it. So as long as you keep the product from drying in here, you'll never have to take this apart. Occasionally things happen, you get called away, it dries in there, you gotta take it apart.
Because one of the guys I know, you know, was showing me how to airbrush, and after every time, he takes his airbrush completely apart and washes everything.
Not a big fan of that.
You know,
I mean, you can if you want, but there's really, it's not necessary if you don't let the product dry in there. Now, like I said, it does happen, you gotta take your airbrush apart. Most of the ones that I deal with have little covers on them that protect the needle chuck, which is this part back here. And the way you take this apart is you would loosen the needle chuck. That comes off, and then you slide your needle out of your brush. And this one's got some gunk on it. You can see this one's dirty.
Yeah, I can.
dry paint.
Yep. Once you take the needle out, you can take and clean that with some cleaner. And you'll know that it starts getting dirty when you start to try to spray paint through your airbrush. It will splatter on you. It won't give you a consistent paint flow.
Poke someone's eye out.
I'll let that one get dirty for demonstration purposes. What?
Good one, Eric. Fast on his feet.
Now, well, it's actually good that this happened, because now I can show you how to actually clean this. So like I said, Windex, ammonia base. Because you saw how hard that was to pull that needle out of that brush. It kind of sticks in there pretty good. And when you clean these needles, you don't want to do anything to compromise the tip. You just want to use your thumb and forefinger, and you just kind of roll that through there and get most of that paint off. And if it's stubborn, you can put it underneath some hot water or something like that.
Get the chisel.
This is obviously railroad tie brown that I was spraying last.
And air-driven chisel.
Yeah.
You can use your scissor.
You can.
Just
Yeah, you can. Yeah, we're not going to get that all
are all
off, but
stainless
it definitely
steel,
makes, it makes a difference. Now, if it's stubborn and it doesn't come off after a little bit, you can, like I said, use a very fine steel wool. You can throw it in there and let it soak if you wanted to. That's fine.
I can do the razor.
Those are all stainless steel, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's say once that's done, the next piece on your airbrush is the nozzle and the tip. This one's extremely tight, so I'll show you on this one. Most of these should be just finger tight. This comes off and it exposes your needle tip, which you can kind of see there. All right, that's where your itemization kind of takes place, where the air and the paint mix together, which is inside the nozzle. All your airbrush kits come with a tool specially designed. Don't take your Leatherman or your pair of pliers to take this nozzle off. Every airbrush comes with its own little tool that's specifically designed to fit this nozzle perfectly and take it off. And then you can soak this in acetone if you wanted to, and it'll take all that dried product off of there and really give it a nice shiny clean look when you're done.
Use a nice pair of vice grips.
Yeah.
This one's a little different,
Adjustable wrench.
because what you have to do after you take the cup off,
Yeah.
there's an Allen screw here.
Big one.
You gotta back this out, back the nozzle and needle out, and then
Undo.
the tip of the airbrush off.
Follow the manufacturer recommended instructions.
20 years ago, you think I'm gonna be able to find them?
One of the things I do when I put the paint tip back on is I'll always pull that needle back out of the way so I don't hit it by accident when I put this nozzle tip back on. You see what I'm saying?
No.
Right now it's exposed. I wouldn't want to hit it
The
and
tip
bend
is
it.
actually built into that, and where these are separate here, right?
Well, this is the paint tip, this is the nozzle. There's a little,
Oh, okay, that's, okay, I got you.
yeah, and I can show you inside one of these little tubes. This is a 2 millimeter tip and nozzle. And that's the nozzle. That's what that little tool takes apart. That little wrench that comes with most airbrushes. And then that's your tip. So these two pieces plus your needle is the only thing that your paint really comes in contact with.
Really look at
If you keep these clean, you should never have to fully disassemble your airbrush unless you get called away and paint dries in there. This is exactly the same design as this gravity feed. This one was finger tight. This one's put on with like torque for some reason. So once your needle's clean, you want to slide that right back into your airbrush. There's seals in there and things like that, so you want to be careful. You don't want to force this needle in. You just want to push it in to where it seats on the nozzle. You'll feel it. Okay? And once you do that, you take your needle chuck. You put that back on. And then you are ready to spray. That's my fluid adjustment knob on this one is on the inside. So the fluid adjustment knob, unlike this gravity feed, which they've designed now so it's external, is actually on the inside of this one. Oh, my handle came off. Yes, John.
On a internal mix, where is the paint actually mixed, you know, if you point it out along the gun?
On an internal,
Yeah,
the paint comes in through here,
yeah,
and when you push down on the trigger, the air is allowed to flow in through here, and the paint gets mixed and itemized inside the nozzle.
okay. Now,
Right in
on
here.
an external, it's mixed outside the nozzle.
That's what his is, right?
That's what
Yeah,
his is.
It's right here. It's basically air gap.
It
The air
looks
is
like
going
a-
across the,
Oh, okay, okay, I see.
So it's still just throwing the paint up in front of
So it looks like this, rather than,
My badger's like that. You take it apart and it's a bitch to get that thing back together.
Well, the problem was my handle came out, so the needle went underneath the handle. So, very important it goes through all the holes it needs to go
that's
through.
internal.
So once you've done that, and you reassemble your airbrush,
Your hook works.
we can put a little bit of cleaner in there, and anything that's left behind, we can spray out.
Point that thing some other day.
Yeah. So you can actually, I kind of brought this along so you can kind of see,
You can see the air.
you can see the difference. When you push down, all you're having is air come out, and as you pull back on the trigger, you see what's happening? You get a lot more paint flow.